Well, it's been quite easy to forget, hasn't it, that the Brexit negotiations are all still basically going on as we're trying to figure out precisely what the deal, if any, is going to be between the United Kingdom and the rest of the European Union. Let's talk to Alex Phillips, someone who knows an awful lot about how the European Union works and someone who might be able to give us some insight into what is actually happening over in Brussels at the moment. Alex, very good afternoon to you.
Hi, good afternoon.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. So I keep hearing sort of slightly, different takes on how things are going. You know, Boris, I think, is trying to make out that there probably will be a deal of some kind, but it's not all that clear what that deal would include. The fishing business seems to be now front and centre of all of the conversations. And Martin Daubney, who we both saw the other day, was telling me that, there's a very interesting future for Emmanuel Macron. If the French lose out big time in the fishing front, that could have a really big knock-on effect for France and Frexit.
Right, yeah. And it's interesting. What we're finally now seeing is the EU are not being able to put on a united front. Barnier is there leading the talks. Ursula von der Leyen's been meeting with Boris Johnson. But what we've got going on behind the scenes now are individual member states suddenly throwing in their two bits and making their demands. And centre to all of that, as you correctly identify, are French demands to continue fishing in our waters. It makes up a huge proportion of their catch. And the industry is quite important to them. Throughout history, we've bumped boats, if you will, with the French, whether it be the Scallop Wars. And Macron's up for re-election himself next year. He won't want to see that critical industry take a hit, especially in, post-pandemic economic fallout. Right. But there's a load of other things going on as well. I mean, we've heard that there might have been some movement on state aid, which I think is a great shame, because I think it's critical that we are able to support our businesses, especially in the wake of a COVID crisis. We've got huge manufacturers that might need us to help prop them up in the short and medium term, right, to save jobs and also to create a prosperous economic platform post-Brexit. But, I mean, we've already passed two deadlines when it comes to when we were supposed to have done a deal or we were walking away. That keeps being pushed further and further back. And I think what we're looking at now is probably going to be another 2 weeks and a new deadline of the 30th of October. And then it will go on again and again. And they'll keep on extending that deadline until they've realised that they're out of this checkmate position, essentially.
Right. Well, when you say we've missed two deadlines, it feels like we've missed 200 deadlines. I mean, it feels like we've been doing this for years. Like I seem to remember not going to see my mother in America. I think it was 2 years ago because her birthday was on March the 29th. And that was the day we were supposed to be leaving the European Union. So I didn't go, and then nothing happened, and so nothing's happening again. But isn't there a danger, though, if we keep taking these extensions, that basically those who support a no-deal Brexit will start to kind of lose faith in the government?
I think those who support a no-deal Brexit have already lost faith in the government, because we could have activated a no-deal Brexit at any moment. We could have said right now, do you know what? Forget all your offers, forget all the wrangling. We're off. We're going to just do our own thing, be a fully sovereign nation, deal with it. Let's now put the mechanisms in place to cope with that both sides of the channel. But we haven't done that, which creates more confusion for business. Nobody knows what's going on. The talks have now gone into the tunnel, so it's very hard to assess what's going on behind closed doors. But I'd imagine the 30,000 corporate lobbyists representing big banking and big business in Brussels will be having their say as well. But it seems apparent to me that, if Boris keeps saying we're going to get a deal, we're going to get a deal, we're going to get a deal, then the only way for that to occur is through some serious capitulation to the EU, which is not what we want. I mean, if you look at some of the reports coming out of German media today, who are a lot more candid with their audience than I think sometimes our media are, they've said quite clearly that the European present company accepted. Yeah. They've said quite clearly in the European Parliament that the UK can no longer expect to have sovereignty if it wants a deal with the EU. Back in the day when we first started talking about a future relationship with the European Union, Michel Barnier himself was talking about a Canada Plus model, which the negotiator Ollie Robbins and Theresa May at the time rejected. But that is essentially a straightforward, off-the-shelf free trade agreement with a few bobbins on top because of our proximity, other things, whether it be related to visas, freedom of movement, so on and so forth, that you wouldn't necessarily have to do with a country the other side of the planet. Now, what we're hearing lately, and this has been reinforced in the German press today, is that's now off the table. And yet the EU are accusing us of the ones not negotiating in good faith. They're the ones who threatened us with a food blockade when essentially it was tacit in the Northern Ireland Protocol that there'd be no risk to passage of goods, especially food-based products. between mainland Great Britain and Northern Ireland. They've reneged on that, forcing us to come up with the IMB. And now what we're seeing essentially is, this deal that you said you wanted to have and that we were offering about 4 years ago, sorry, that doesn't exist anymore. If you want to deal with us, we still want to control vast swathes of your economy and your regulation, which frankly just shouldn't fly.
No, of course. And what's happened to their threat to sue over the internal markets bill? Because that was all over the press a while ago, and I seem to remember that Christine Jardine, the Liberal Democrat MP from Edinburgh, was on the show today talking about, or not today, on the show a couple of weeks ago, talking about how, our reputation is at stake. That all seems to have been forgotten, doesn't it?
Oh, what a song and dance that was. The EU activate infringement proceedings against member states all the time. This is not a new thing that they do. And what they basically said is, well, because you've come up with the internal markets bill and it jeopardizes what's been put in statute in the withdrawal agreement, which is a terrible document, of course.
Yes.
Therefore, we're now going to launch proceedings against you, and you have until the end of October to answer to those proceedings. And that puts us now in the new deadline after today, in which a deal should have been made. So it's more sort of trying to strong arm us and use geopolitical maneuvering, because what they did is precipitate a reaction in America where you had the Democrats at that point riding high, thinking they were going to walk this election, saying, okay, if the UK brings about the IMB, we won't do a free trade deal with the UK.
Yeah.
So, and that's largely because in American politics, the Democrats are supported hugely by the Irish American lobby. So the EU have been on sort of pretty significant manoeuvres to try and strong arm us and get our backs against the rope. I think the sad thing is, eventually, I'm fairly certain we probably will capitulate.
Yes, well, I hope not, because the trouble is, of course, that we now hear that from Downing Street's point of view, they're talking to the Democrats in terms of trade, because they're worried that if they start backing Trump and he loses, and we've seen all this before, haven't we, with Bush and Clinton, they should know better than to mingle themselves with American policies. Just stay the hell out of it and don't try and schmooze anybody, would be my advice.
Well, it's amazing, isn't it, how all of a sudden Democrats in America suddenly get a taste for involving themselves in our politics. I remember when we first had the referendum and Obama came out and said the UK would be back of the queue for a trade deal. We're America's biggest trading partner. Yeah. It doesn't make sense. But they all sort of, famous O''Obama when he was in his own presidential campaign, suddenly find this sort of Irish luck from somewhere.
Yeah.
But I think we just need to not listen to it. Whatever happens and whoever the administration is in America, I'm sure they'll want to do a free trade agreement with us. But it would actually bring me a bit more comfort if Donald Trump was still at the helm, because he's got an appetite to do it and do it in a way I think that would be far more respectful of our industries, because I think we can have a good communication with Donald Trump. The politicking coming out of the left of America at the moment, and if we're still a nominally right-wing country with a conservative government, it could well be difficult to build those bridges.
Yes, and I mean, you still get these daft stories. One in the Sun today on page 4, Battle of Portaloo, which is a good headline. Motorways to get toilets for Brexit delay. So apparently all the lorry drivers who are going to be sitting in their lorries waiting to get on a ferry are going to have a whole load of Portaloos down the M20. Right. I mean, really?
Well, actually, there's another side of this story that people aren't talking about, which is if we leave without a deal, after the 31st of December when the transition period ends, we've given a 6-month grace period where we're not going to be doing checks on produce and lorries and things coming from the EU into the UK. We're like, okay, it's all good, originating from the EU, drive on in. The EU are not doing the same, which is why there's now this conversation of, are there going to be queues trying to get to the other side of the channel? But that's surely going to be injurious to their own industries. They actually export a lot more to us than we do to them, and they're just frustrating their own trade routes by doing that. But this is the way they behave, and they're rarely called out on it. People seem to think the EU are a benign and benevolent force. They are not. They're run by a big cartel, a cartel of big banks and big business, and they're more than happy to play dirty. And that's what they're doing at the moment. And I think that we should have the guts to say, look, we didn't vote to be some sort of satellite state of the EU, still bound within your regulations and tied to your rule of law. We voted to be an independent country. It's very simple. And what they're saying now is you don't get to be an independent country if you want to have any sort of deal with us, which is just, it's frankly geopolitical bullying.
Yeah, it's bonkers, isn't it? And you would have thought that as COVID sort of takes its toll across Europe, they might have actually better things to do than to mess around with Brexit. They might just get on with it.
I think actually there's a certain sense now in some of the other member states that they want this to just be sorted out, and I think really being led by Merkel is a sort of more sanguine view perhaps of a looser relationship with the EU in future, and it is coming down to these very sticky points where member states now have their own interests, and such as fishing. But it's very difficult to see how we're going to manoeuvre through this in the next 2 weeks unless we've got something already packaged in place, which sadly we do. It's called the political declaration, that terrible 30-odd page document tacked on to the end of the withdrawal agreement, which laid out what the future relationship would look like. And it's essentially a relationship of utter subservience. It's a terrible framework to set off with any sort of trade negotiation, but that is what Boris bound us into with the oven-ready deal. So now you see the clock being run down. I can't really see any other way other than this dichotomy of the political declaration or a no deal, and I just don't think no deal is going to happen.
No. Well, I hope you're wrong, but I take your word for it because you talk to more people over there than I do. Alex, thanks very much indeed. Alex Phillips, former Brexit Party MEP, not particularly optimistic about a no-deal Brexit, but also it sounds like we're going to be dealing with this for a few weeks to come, which is a bit soul-destroying as well, isn't it? But I suppose once we're all locked down in our houses, we can pore over the Brexit documents. That'll be interesting, won't it?